Good afternoon, everyone. I am Max Ufberg. I'm a senior editor at Fast Company. We're here today to talk about a whole bunch of things. The internet was once seen as a tool for freedom and innovation, and in many ways it still is, but it's also at risk, threatened by mass surveillance, cyber attacks, decline of net neutrality, global fragmentation, a whole host of other issues. I'm joined here by three panelists. We've got Stan Adams, lead public policy specialist at the Wikimedia Foundation. Alissa, is that a chair? Yeah. Nicole Ozer, technology and civil liberties director for the ACLU of Northern California. And Alissa Starzak, vice president and global head of public policy at Cloudflare. We'll jump in with some questions, but first, I think it'd be helpful to just quickly kind of go down the line and say what it is you do at your organizations. We could start with you, Stan.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Stan. I work for the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization that supports projects like Wikipedia. You've all used Wikipedia maybe today, right? There's a dozen other free knowledge projects alongside that. My job is to talk to Congress and to try to keep them from passing laws and regulations that make it harder for Wikipedia to operate. I deal with regulatory agencies as well on things like copyright and a few other things, right? So I'm an advocate for the free knowledge movement. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending part of your afternoon with us. I'm Nicole Ozer. I'm the Technology and Civil Liberties Director for the ACLU in California. Thank you. I'm a lawyer by training, but my work has been focused for the past 20 years on the intersection of technology and civil liberties and making sure that technology works for the people and drives access and equity and justice. So thanks so much for being here.
And hi, I'm Alissa Starzak, and I'm going to be very disappointed if you don't cheer for me, but I'm the Vice President and Global Head of Public Policy at Cloudflare. Cloudflare runs a big global network, and we do cybersecurity and network protection around the world, and I follow like Stan, I follow regulation, but I follow them globally. So digital regulation around the world, we interact with policymakers in lots of different countries. Thank you.
I'm loving the cheering. We're giving the Robert Rodriguez panel a run for its money. We'll start with you, Nicole, and everyone jump in, but the term digital rights covers a ton of issues: privacy, access, free speech, etc. What is the most urgent thing right now on your plate?
I mean, big picture, if it hasn't been astoundingly clear that how technology is built, how it's used, and who it's controlled by isn't absolutely critical to our lives, our rights, and literally the entire future of democracy, the last few weeks have made that truly evident. So, whether it's what's happening with DOGE right now, the fact that all the safeguards on the federal side for AI have been rescinded, but at the ACLU, we are really focused on the big picture, ensuring that all of the digital information about who we are and where we go and what we do and who we know, whether we or a loved one is seeking reproductive health care or gender affirming care, whether we're an immigrant, whether we're engaging in important social or political protests, whether that be about climate justice or racial justice or LGBTQ rights. It's incredibly important that that information not be weaponized and used against us. So, we're all living incredibly digital lives. Like, it can't be any clearer than here at South by. And what happens here in Austin, what happens in San Francisco, what happens in Montana or Idaho, that information doesn't stay there. Whether it's, post 9/11 surveillance infrastructure, that information gets sent to fusion centers into the government, or all the information that's collected in social media or online searches. We want to make sure that that digital information is safeguarded. And so we are doing work on the local level, on the state level, across the entire country on a firewall for freedom to defend rights. And hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit more about just all the ways I hope you and those you know can plug into that work.
You mentioned firewall. Excuse me. You mentioned firewall. So Stan, I'm curious. Made me think of China's Great Firewall. Are Western democracies moving closer toward their own versions of a restricted internet, and how are you grappling with that and trying to navigate that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the answer is yes, they are. I would point to two things as evidence of that. The TikTok ban or not ban is one more recent thing, right? Is like saying to Americans, you cannot access this piece of technology, right? You can't use this thing because it's from China, right? And that's sort of the reciprocal that we have in China, right? We are blocked in China. Wikipedia is not available in China, and so that, as a precedent, that is not a great thing for Western democracies. I would also point to things like age verification laws that are coming around as a way to say, some people cannot access some parts of the internet, right? And so it's a partial block, but it's still a trend in the wrong direction. And so, that ostensibly is aimed at keeping kids away from harmful material online, but it also impacts people who don't have a government ID, right? Or people who cannot prove who they are in some way online, or people who don't want to submit their face to AI scan and show their ID online at all, right? This is one of the main ways of doing age verification, and so it's just a soft way of saying don't go there, which is bad for internet freedom generally. I'm guessing some of my colleagues might have some feedback on this too.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that people don't often understand about the internet is that it didn't start off the way we think about it now, right? You don't think back and think to yourself, hey, what is this defense project that started just connecting networks? And there was a lot of stuff that happened where we didn't actually build in privacy, we didn't build in security, and now we're sort of dealing with that on the back end. And there was something else that happened actually on this world of sort of firewall. We didn't, countries sort of joined their networks together and didn't think about the reality that meant that their citizens could access everything that was online anywhere. And so we're kind of dealing with some of the fallout of that now, and I think Stan sort of flagged a few of those pieces. I think one of the components that we think about at Cloudflare is that there's technical architecture underneath the things that we do, right? So if you're doing a TikTok ban, who's supposed to implement it? What does that look like, right? It came out of the App Store, it came out of certain cloud providers. There's a whole world of technical architecture that sits underneath that then becomes the mechanism that people use to block. And I think Stan's point from the US standpoint, we're seeing it happening all over the world. So what does blocking look like in lots of different places? People are going down into the internet's architecture and they're changing things so that they can limit access. And that is a very scary world if you think about the open internet as a good thing.
What are the tactics to push back against this sort of overreach or censorship? I mean, I think you probably all deal with it in various ways and different approaches. So maybe we'll kick off with you, Alissa, but we can really ask everybody here.
Yeah, we try to advertise it. We try to make it really transparent when things happen so that people know. Because the reality is, if you live in a democracy, you should care about these issues, right? So if you want the ACLU to fight for it, they have to know about it. And so one of the first things that we do, if we get pressure to block something, we try to make sure people know. We try to make it obvious what's coming and why, and we go for transparency. Sometimes we will fight directly. So we are currently fighting some overblocking in Europe, for example. But the first step, I think, is always transparency.
Yeah, I would go ahead.
No, you go, Stan.
In the efforts of transparency, right, like Wikipedia is that for the world, right? This is where we find out like what's happening in other countries, in other languages, and so making that information available first in the press so that it can then be reported on in Wikipedia is step one, right? But then it's also all of our jobs and all of your jobs as citizens to tell your elected representatives, right? Like, please don't do this. Like, tell them. You are all constituents of someone. Let them know. Like, don't block apps, right? Like, don't do these things that cut people off from the internet.
And I would just say, I mean, both what companies do in terms of transparency, but also actually supporting laws that are really new laws that are really important that safeguard the information that is collected by companies is really critical. So, I mentioned our Firewall for Freedom work. We are working on local laws to make sure that surveillance information doesn't flow to the federal government and can be used to weaponize. But we're also, thank you. We're also working on a lot of really important state laws that safeguards the information that's collected by cell phone companies and social media and AI services. There's a law that I worked on spearheading in California called the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act, CALECPA. It's the law that makes sure that if the government wants to search your cell phone or demand information from any of the millions of companies that you work with, that they need to get a warrant. There are many other states that are trying to pass similar laws right now. We're also working to pass laws to limit the use of geofence warrants. I don't know if anyone's heard of those, but they're a newer surveillance technique. Yes, Cloudflare has definitely heard about them. Wikimedia has definitely heard about them. But it's a newer surveillance technique where the government says, I want to know through location information every single person that's been in a certain location. So they can know everyone who's sitting here right now in this audience, everyone who's been at a protest, everyone who's gone to a certain reproductive clinic. That is so scary, particularly in this current moment. And so we are working to pass new state laws to limit that, but we're also working with companies to do what they can do internally to limit the types of information they collect, how they retain it, how they share it. And so we have some new resources at the ACLU, both in terms of how you can get involved on the local level or on the state level. But if you work in a company, or we're all customers of companies, pushing them to do what they can do, maybe even just quietly, can make a huge, huge impact. When Google changed its policy of how it retains location information, that cut off geofence warrants to Google. And so there's a lot that companies can do, and a lot that we as individuals need to do right now. Because, I will not sugarcoat it. We need to be in high gear across every strategy right now. That's what we're definitely doing at the ACLU, but we need everyone to be involved in that.
Can I just add to that on the company side? It's not just policy, right? You have engineers in the crowd, right? You have somebody who actually builds technology. We at Cloudflare really focus on thinking about privacy-enhancing technology. So how do you make it so that companies don't collect the information, so you don't even have access to it, so you don't need the law because you don't have it? So there's a lot of work that can be done on the technology side, on the policy side, on the internal company policy side, that actually helps serve that cause.
Yeah, code is law. Both the infrastructure and the policies, there's such an important space for everyone to be involved in defending and continuing to advance rights right now. Because this is not a moment where we just have to crawl into a ball. This is a moment where we have to be aggressively using our entire toolkit to be doing what's right for ourselves and our communities.
This is why Wikipedia has always collected the bare minimum of information from everyone, readers and editors. We don't want to know who you are. We don't want to know where you are. We don't want to know what you're looking at, right? That's up to you. And so if we don't have that information, it means we cannot give it to the cops when they come asking, right? That's why we do that.
You mentioned, Nicole, you mentioned some of these ACLU resources, but I think for a lot of people, right, there's this resignation with surveillance and data collection and all this stuff because they don't really know what you can do on a local or individualized level. So, I'm curious, are there steps everyday people can take to protect digital rights and freedoms in this era?
Absolutely. The ACLU, we're in every state. We have 4 million members, but this is a moment when we need more people to be involved in all the ways that they can be. And I'll say I've been doing work on the local and state level for 20 years for the ACLU, and the difference that it makes when 5 people, 10 people come to a community meeting, send a letter, call a legislator, show up in their state capital, it literally changes the calculus of a really important law on these issues, either passing or not passing. So, Right now it can feel a little, like what's happening on the federal level and can we make a difference? I would say absolutely we can, through the work that we're doing locally, through the work that we're doing on the state level, and also important work we can do to make sure that federal bills don't pass that actually erase protections and erase democratic engagement and erase the work of grassroots movements on the local level. So making sure that there aren't federal bills with what we call preemption, which means that state and local laws can't go forward. So I will say, obviously, you can't work at the ACLU for 20 years without being an optimist, but I'm an optimist because I also see the work that we can do every day together. And I know that we can move these issues forward. This doesn't have to be at a time when we are just on the defense. We can continue to build the power for the issues that we really care about. So I'm really glad to be here with you all today, and thanks for being here.
Infrastructure conversations inevitably lead to discussions about control and fragmentation, whether that's local or data localization laws, control over undersea cables, and so forth. Maybe we'll start with you, Alissa. How are geopolitical tensions shaping this fragmentation, and what does that look like for Cloudflare?
Yeah, absolutely. It happens all over the place. And I think what you see in a lot of countries around the world is that people start to get nervous about relying on the U.S. If they think the U.S. isn't a good partner, they basically say, U.S. companies are subject to U.S. law, that's going to be a problem. And we've seen that for a while. It's not new, but it's expanding. And I think what then happens is that countries around the world will say, well, you should use our infrastructure, so only use companies that are built here. And so that's part of it. Or they will say, as you suggested, data localization, you have to store your data here, not always caring whether that actually has an impact or not. Because from a security standpoint, if it's connected to the internet, that doesn't actually give you much security because you can still get it if it's in a different country, potentially. But I think that tension actually just, the lack of trust means that people don't trust the laws, means that people don't trust the companies that are associated with that country. And it really puts pressure on certainly on businesses, but also sort of makes it so that everyone sort of turns inward. And I think long term, if we want a global internet where you can get access to everything that's on the internet, that is a big problem for us. And I think going back to Nicole's point, you have to fight for the things that you want. You have to fight for having a global internet where you can access everything, because it does matter. And it really opens up the world for so many people. And we don't always think about it. We sort of take it for granted. But now is a time when it's starting to fall apart. And so really thinking about what we can do to sort of make sure that doesn't happen is going to be important.
Yeah, so just to dig in on the data localization piece for a minute to provide an example of what that looks like, right? Unfortunately, the U.S. trade rep last year, 2 years ago, decided to back away from these provisions that the U.S. has typically supported, saying we do not want data localization mandates in our trade agreements, right? That allows U.S. companies to decide where they keep their data and not necessarily be subject to another law somewhere else that says you have to keep your data here too. The reason we don't like that is because when you keep your data in another locality, right, you're then subject to those laws and subject to those judicial processes and legal processes that may not be as friendly as they are here in the United States, right? You have fewer tools to push back. You might have to provide access to that data to governments abroad. And so that is a way that is dangerous for companies and for the people whose data that is stored by those companies to sort of find new homes in less friendly governments and to give access to them, right? And I won't name country names here, but there are lots of them who want access to your data so they can find out what you're doing and take action against you, right? These are oppressive regimes trying to find out who's editing Wikipedia and what they're putting on Wikipedia so that they can track them down physically and detain them, right? This is a real thing that happens.
And switching gears, because we don't have so much time, so kind of just jumping around here. But what about here in the U.S.? In January, a federal appeals court struck down the FCC's 2024 net neutrality order. If net neutrality and other protections aren't present at the federal level, what does the future of the internet look like? Nicole, we'll go with you.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening on the federal level, and it is not about advancing rights and defending democracy right now. I mean, that's the reality. You've got, as you mentioned, sort of, net neutrality. You've got the rescission of the AI safeguards. You've got a lot of other things that are happening with Doge. I mean, it is like we have a firewall, but that is a fire hose in terms of what's coming from the federal level. But states have always been known as the laboratories of democracy. Right now, states have to be the defenders of democracy. Like, that is our reality, and we need to be using our state laws and our state mechanisms as aggressively as possible to not just defend, but continue to move really important issues forward. So I mentioned some of what we're doing on the local level and the state level that absolutely everybody here and everyone you connect with can be involved with. It will make the difference between whether or not we can pass those laws or not. But we also, yes, there's a U.S. Supreme Court and there's a U.S. Constitution, but there's also state Supreme Courts and state constitutions. A lot of times you don't learn about that very much in law school, and we haven't had to utilize it as much. But we are, we have a new state Supreme Court project at the ACLU. We are working very, very diligently to be able to use state constitutional rights as creatively and aggressively as possible. I work in California. Do we have any other Californians in here? All right. We actually have a constitutional right to privacy. I don't know how many of you all know that in the state of California. It was passed in 1972, and it applies to not just the government, but to private parties. And it was passed at the tail end of the civil rights movement, particularly to safeguard exactly these types of issues. And so I just wrote a very long piece on that, which you will not want to read, but it talks all about how we can really use that much more aggressively to defend and promote rights. And so we are thinking creatively, we are thinking strategically, we are thinking aggressively at the ACLU and with our partners across the country, partners also in companies, about how we can use the law that we have and build the new law that we need to make sure that democracy does not defend itself. We all have to be engaged in that, and that's what we're doing.
Can I? After that, too. I'm going to kind of follow on Nicole's point, because the thing she didn't say is that there is actually net neutrality legislation in the states. So net neutrality is super wonky. So if you haven't seen John Oliver, you should probably go watch it. Do that. But practically, what it means is that the entity that gives you your broadband internet can do things like blocking or throttling certain kinds of content, right? So the reason, why do you care? Well, it means that you could slow down or block Wikipedia, or you could slow down or block certain videos if they don't want you to see it. And so the question is, who has that right? And what the law basically says is, who doesn't have that right? Your internet service provider, who may have a business interest in not showing you certain kinds of content or in feeding you others faster. So just so people understand what that issue is. And the idea really is, shouldn't we have laws safeguarding it? And that was what was struck down for complicated reasons, legal reasons that you do not want to know right now. That's what was struck down at the federal level.
But we do have net neutrality laws on the state level. So again, that's why stopping federal preemption is also incredibly important, so that we can actually take action on the state level to fill gaps or move issues forward.
Also, you mentioned a very long piece. Where can our audience read that piece?
I recently joined LinkedIn. It is on there. Or if you go to the Berkeley Technology Law Journal, there's a nice little abstract, although it is a 116-page law review article that I wrote on the nights and weekends. But there's a nice abstract and a recent piece I also wrote that also links to it about Doge and contextual issues. So it's called Golden State Sword, the history and future of the California constitutional right to privacy.
I'm doing some PR, too.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to hire you.
Yeah. Stan, what are the lessons that we can learn from past fights for digital freedom? Thinking of Snowden revelations, all sorts of stuff to help us navigate these challenges. Like, what do we look to in the past?
The thing you look to is people like the internet, right? We all use it. It's a valuable tool for everyone. And when we get upset about things that the government does or the companies do, we should speak out about that. I mean, that's the thing there is to do, right? Is to say, hey, government, please don't spy on me, right? Hey, companies, please don't step on my internet browsing, right? And so I think to me, that's the core lesson, is that this internet thing is built for all of us, and it is up to us to preserve it the way we like. I think that's the take home for me. Nicole?
Take home of what people should do right now, or just generally?
No, I mean, I was asking about sort of past like lessons that we can sort of emulate right now that are past wins of sorts.
I mean, I've been deep in our archives in this nerdy way about the late 60s and early 70s for this article I mentioned. But, it was really a moment where so many people understood so viscerally what was at stake. What was at stake for their personal lives, for their reproductive freedom, for the future of their families and for democracy, there wasn't surveillance. There was widespread surveillance of movements, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, obviously the civil rights movement. And so these laws that were put in place in the early 70s were about trying to make sure this could not happen again. But as I said, democracy doesn't defend itself and laws don't pass on their own. We have to have the power as people to move those issues forward. So, I do hope that, people visit us at ACLU.org. We have an action alert up right now that's ACLU.org/stop-Doge. Everyone here, get on your phones. I know you have them. Fill out that action alert. There's no reason not to. It does really make a difference. And get involved with our people power work and all our work at the ACLU, because we are a large organization, but we need everybody to be involved in the fights that we have ahead.
Just use the internet to protect the internet.
And it's happened before. That is, you referenced SOPA PIPA. Basically what happened is people came together and said, don't pass this law, and it became toxic and Congress didn't pass it. So don't think it can't happen. We all have a role to play. Think about what services you use. Think about what you care about. Every single person has a role to play.
By the way, SOPA PIPA is back. Please write your congresspeople about that.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to rapid fire just one or two, but let's just a couple quick questions on AI. Should AI models like ChatGPT and Gemini be required to disclose the data sets they're trained on to avoid bias and misinformation? And maybe we'll start with you, Alissa, but what are the risks of these being controlled by these large corporations?
AI is hard, right? It's hard to figure out actually what's coming out of it. It's not just what goes into it, but there's a garbage in, garbage out problem. But also, it's actually hard to sort of pin down exactly what you're getting. And I think it's hard to, if you got that information as a consumer, would you actually understand what it meant, or what it probably not, right? So we have to find ways to actually deal with accountability, think about protection, making sure that certain kinds of information doesn't go into AI, for example. If you want to be able to control it, we want to make sure that there are tools for that. So I don't think it's as simple as transparency in that context. I actually think that we need more individual controls about making sure that we have available things to prevent things from going into AI that we don't want to, and that we own some of those pieces. And I think longer term, that's where we end up going on AI. I think that, again, we want to be able to have mechanisms. If you build content, if you don't want it to go into an AI model, you can block it from going into an AI model. But there's a lot more coming.
I would just say, AI is new. Some of it is complicated, but what isn't complicated is making sure whatever technology advances, that it's actually working for people and working to make people's lives better. And that's what we're really focused on. There's specialized lawyers like me at the ACLU that think about all the confusing, complicated things, but, so much of the time there's a narrative that this is too complicated for people to understand and that you can't engage in it. That's absolutely not true. You know how technology affects you, your lives, your communities, and I just encourage you to always make sure that you don't get swayed by that narrative, because yes, AI is new, but what's not new is making sure that technology is lifting all boats and not just profiting offer a few.
We're actually at time. Maybe we could do one quick thing. Like I'd like, we talked about net neutrality, a lot of things. I would love to just hear maybe like a couple words from each one on something that, ending on an optimistic note, like a recent win or something just giving you hope for the future of the internet. Stan, want to start with you?
Wikipedia is still out there, y'all. Right? Visit it, go to the site, become an editor. Think about adding to the corpus of knowledge that is shared with the rest of the world. We are still the only nonprofit website in the top 10 most visited websites on Earth. That's for a reason. So keep it up. Thank you all.
I would say on the optimistic side, the reason we're all up here is because we still have the internet. It still works. We're still fighting for it. And I actually think that we can continue to do it. And it's going to continue to evolve and develop. And we can continue to build privacy so that things like Wikipedia can continue to exist. And the ACLU can continue to defend them.
And with all that's happening here at South by, that you all chose to be here with us today. So, I mean, that gives me hope and optimism. I already have it, but just seeing all of you here and you all being engaged and hopefully more engaged in the work that all of us are doing. So together we can move forward.
Thank you so much to our three panelists, and thanks everyone for listening. And stick around, we've got more to come.